Daily, I examine my person on 3 counts. In my undertaking on behalf of other people, have I failed to do my utmost? In my interactions with colleagues and friends, have I failed to make good on my word? In what has been passed on to me, have I failed to carry it into practice? The exemplary person helps bring out the best in others, but does not help bring out the worst. The petty person does just the opposite. These are just 2 pieces of advice from Confucius, the Chinese philosopher credited with creating a value system that continues to influence East Asian civilization thousands of years after his death. Now, everyone has likely heard the name Confucius, but we want to examine several more detailed questions. First, who was Confucius? Next, what did he believe? What problems did he want to solve, and what type of society did he seek to create? In asking and answering these questions, we can get a more thorough understanding of Chinese history. Confucius lived from 551 to 479 BCE, a time of unrest and constant warfare in Chinese history. Although there was a nominal dynasty in charge, the Eastern Zhou, the rulers of many small states and kingdoms competed for power and hoped to be the next person to unite China under a new dynasty. Although it's common to think of Chinese history in terms of all these different dynasties, the amount of time that China was united under a single rule is almost equal to the amount of time that it was divided under different competing states. In this map, you can see the number of different competing states at the time of Confucius, and how Chinese civilization was centered on the east coast and along 2 rivers, the Yellow River towards the north and the Yangtze River towards the south. This time of political unrest was also a time of philosophical flourishing. Different thinkers gave advice to rulers of competing kingdoms and debated questions like, is human nature good or bad? What types of governance structures and laws should be put in place based on this understanding of human nature? Confucius was one of these figures who gave advice to different rulers and also attracted a number of students. However, and this is important, the influence of his ideas did not reach their height until after his death. The main record we have that details Confucian thought comes from the Analects, a short book that's based on conversations between Confucius and his students. Confucius, when he was observing the political unrest and the competition between states during his time period, looked back at the Western Zhou dynasty from 1046 to 771 BCE and saw it as the golden age of Chinese history. At that time, China was ruled under one dynasty by a series of enlightened and wise political figures, including the Duke of Zhou. Confucius had a lot of respect for the Duke of Zhou, saying, "In politics, I follow the Duke of Zhou." However, since that earlier period, the state of politics and society had deteriorated. The task for Confucius was to find a way how Chinese society could recapture this golden age and move beyond the political instability of his own time. For most of his life, Confucius advised rulers and students on the best way to achieve this goal and to reorder society. Now, he saw several ways to accomplish this. First, each person should practice self-cultivation through study in order to become a gentleman, should observe proper rituals, and observe correct behavior within relationships. Notice that Confucianism is actually a very worldly belief system. It is not really concerned with gods and spirits, but with the action and behavior of human beings. If everyone follows this program, China would be able to recapture the golden age of stability and harmony. Now that we've talked about the big picture of Confucianism, we want to advance one step further and talk about the details. For Confucius, the important goal is that every person should strive to be a gentleman, or a junzi. The key part of becoming a gentleman were first to be benevolent, or ren, which meant to be kind-hearted. Also important was to observe filial piety, or shao, which meant listening to and honoring parents and grandparents, as well as practicing the correct rituals known as li. Beyond these character traits, Confucius also stressed the importance of studying, particularly studying works from the earlier Zhou period and other classics. As he said to one of his students, "Study without thought is vain. Thought without study is dangerous." In a way, Confucianism is a lot about self-improvement. Confucius acknowledged that human nature was good, but also that humans erred. Hence, the need to study and properly observe rituals, particularly rituals that involved honoring your parents and ancestors. However, this was not the entirety of Confucian thought. Confucius also stressed a series of hierarchical relationships that were supposed to govern behavior and action. Of the 5 key relationships, all but one of them was hierarchical. The relationships of ruler and minister, husband and wife, parent and child, older brother and younger brother were all top-down and hierarchical. The only relationship that took place on a more equal footing was between a friend and a friend. Clear rules of conduct governed these relationships. A minister could not act like a ruler, and a ruler could not act like a minister. Such would upset the order of the world. As one of the most famous quotations in the Analects reminds us, a ruler should act like a ruler, a minister should act like a minister, a father should act like a father, a son should act like a son. This system of action and behavior, based on your position in a certain relationship, is what Confucius called the rectification of names. If the rectification of names was practiced by each individual according to their proper position in a relationship, society would be ordered, organized, and prosperous. However, if they weren't, and people did not observe the correct action and behavior based on these relationships, the world would be disordered. As Confucius laid out, under these conditions, what is said will not sound logical, nothing will be accomplished. When nothing is accomplished, then rites and music will not flourish, then punishment will not be made according to the crime, then common people won't know where to put their hands and feet. Now, this is all to say that not following the proper actions in a certain relationship would cause chaos. In this way, Confucianism is quite conservative and a hierarchical belief system. Now, what does this system actually mean for people at different levels of society? Well, for rulers, it meant that they should study classical texts and also historical examples in order to rule benevolently. Taxes should be low, punishments should not be too harsh. Also, the ruler needed to perform proper rituals to ensure bountiful harvests. A ruler should not spend all of his time on pleasures and hobbies and ignoring affairs of state. For a minister, it meant giving loyal advice to the king, but not participating in any plots or political intrigue against the ruler. The minister's role was to ensure that the king ruled benevolently. For a father, it meant following the laws of the land, honoring and listening to his own parents and grandparents, and maintaining order in his family. For children, it meant listening to and obeying parents, particularly in regards to marriages. At this time, most marriages were arranged with the bride and groom not having seen each other or known each other before the wedding day. When Confucius was alive, his ideas were not dominant and were actually just one philosophical belief system among many, part of the 100 schools of thought that flourished in this time of political unrest. After the death of Confucius, his disciples continued to spread his ideas. However, several hundred years after Confucius died, the Qin dynasty from 221 to 206 BCE unified China. The Qin dynasty actually did not adhere to Confucian thinking, but to legalist thinking, which called for strict laws and heavy punishments because they saw human nature as evil. The Qin did not encourage intellectual debate, and the ideas of Confucius did not receive support. However, the Qin dynasty didn't last very long, and the next dynasty, the Han dynasty, adopted Confucian ideas about government. Later, although aspects of Buddhism and Taoism influenced Chinese society and government, Confucianism still played the most important role. The writings of Confucius and one of his followers, Mencius, became two of the key texts in Chinese history. Later, they became an important part of the civil exam system to enter bureaucratic service. Generations of young Chinese spent years memorizing these and other classical texts in order to prepare for the civil service exam. In government and outside government, Confucianism had an important influence on Chinese society as a way to guide the action of the ruler as well as the behavior of individuals. That's the basic outline of who Confucius was and what Confucianism is, but I still think there are several worthwhile questions to be discussed. What about Confucianism might the ruler of a dynasty find appealing? Why do you think Confucianism ultimately became more influential than the other philosophical systems that emerged at around the same time? And finally, what might be some of the advantages and disadvantages of the influence of Confucianism on Chinese society?